Welcome to the ECE Classroom Podcast with your host, Susie Beghin, inspiring early childhood educators every day. Hello, and welcome to the ECE Classroom Podcast. My name is Susie Beghin, and I'm the host of the show. Today, I have a special guest joining us from Hello Speech. Her name is Mary Plain. Welcome to the show, Mary.
Hi, Susie. Thanks for having me.
So, Mary, tell me a little bit about yourself and about your business.
Okay, so I'm a speech and language pathologist. I've been practicing for a long time, probably about 17 years, I would say now. And, in the pediatric space, so working with children with speech and language delays, developmental delays, like autism, and other areas like stuttering and literacy. And over the years, I have started to work with other clinicians who go into the homes for children who in the Greater Toronto area. And I partnered with a behavior analyst. Her name is Renit, and the two of us started the company called Hello Speech Developmental Services. And now we have a team of wonderful clinicians who go into homes and childcare centers and private schools around the Toronto area, doing mostly speech and language. And we've recently expanded to occupational therapy. And we also have some behavioral consultation, behavioral support as well. And our most exciting latest, endeavor is that we are really trying to go and work with the childcare centers and the daycares so that we can work with children directly in their school settings.
That's wonderful. And we are starting to use your services as well. So I'm really excited about that. So our audience here on the podcast is early childhood educators or people who are interested in early childhood education. And so I really want to focus our discussion today on those early years. So as early childhood educators, I know within our daycare centers, our teachers or educators often come across children with varying abilities, right? Mm-hmm. So what would you say that early childhood educators should look for to determine whether or not a child may have a speech delay or may be needing services that you provide?
Great question. So most people think about words, right? How many words does a child have as that first indicator? And that is certainly a good thing to look for. So, we can send out milestone charts. We won't get into every detail here, but there are certain indicators of number of words to use by a certain age. So the educators can refer back to those charts and they can look and say, you know what, this child is this age. It says here that the range should be using this many words. So that's a really good one. Gestures are also really important. People forget about how important they are. They play a crucial role in the development of language. So this includes things like shaking their head to say no. Instead of just pushing, we want them to be shaking their head, pointing to request rather than, just a reach or a hand lead. And then things like greetings, like waving.
I never really considered the nonverbal communication, but I guess that's just as important, right? We're so focused on how many words do they have, right? And that's some good input.
Yes, exactly. And we all often hear parents say, oh, my child points. And then when we get, more information, we find out, oh, actually they're kind of just reaching, which is okay, but we want to make sure that they're developing more of those more specific gestures. And then other things to look for are, struggling to follow simple directions, which the schools, the educators it's a great place for them to be able to look at that because there's so many directions given throughout a school day. Also getting frustrated, right? Getting frustrated is something that's a real indicator of a communication delay.
Right. Yeah, and we see that all the time in daycare because we kind of get to know what, the benchmarks are in terms of what to expect at certain ages. What would we expect from an infant? What would we expect from a toddler or preschooler? Is there a certain age that you would say, don't recommend before this age because they haven't fully developed, um, you know, their speech capabilities yet? Like, how early could somebody refer to you?
Right. Yeah. So we do get this question a lot. And, early signs can show up as young as 18 months. By 18 months, we would expect kids to have a few words, be able to follow some simple commands, and using gestures like we talked about. Um, and then, like, as you progress, even say they're two and they're not combining words or they have fewer than 50 words, we also, we understand that it's a big range and, the educators know a lot, so use your best judgment. And then I also wanted to mention that, we also have to look at play and social development because it really does tie in the social milestones. They really do tie into speech and language development. So if you're seeing a child in the 1 to 2 age range and they're not waving for social exchange, or they're not copying actions or trying to make somebody laugh or engaging in simple turn taking, or just in general engaging less socially than you would expect, then that would be another thing to look for.
Right. So as early as 18 months. All
Yes,
right, that's good to
definitely.
know.
Yes.
So I guess that leads to my next question is if we've determined that we see some red flags or we see some potential for needing speech services or at least a speech assessment to see if there is a need for speech services, the difficulty we often have is how to approach parents, right? Because parents usually um, don't think there's anything to be concerned about. So I've heard some parents say, "Oh, I was like that when I was a kid. I didn't develop speech till I was 2 years old or 3 years old, or my other son, developed late." Or we get these kinds of pushback. So, what can we do to approach parents in a way that they might be receptive? Because I do know that early intervention is critical for this specifically. So, what kind of things do you think we can do?
Yeah, this is such a great question because we do find this is actually one of the reasons we're passionate about going into the childcare centers to help. We know that educators know, but it's that broaching the topic with parents can often be tough. And we even ourselves as clinicians, as speech therapists, we often have difficulty even broaching other topics within the speech therapy that can be challenging. So it's such a hard thing to do. And ultimately educators, they're the front lines when it comes to spotting speech and language challenges, and parents look to them to know if their child is thriving in the classroom, and they're often the first to notice. So we often say it's a sensitive topic, but you can start by focusing on the strengths, so what the child is doing well, and then you can gently share your concerns about their participation in the classroom, and you can use specific examples about, in this case, they're using this way to communicate their message, and we would hope that they would communicate this way, and we just want to make sure and check. And you can also reassure them that early intervention, like you said, is really important. It can make a big difference, and earlier assessment can help with that. And also, it's the destigmatization of it is really important as well. So parents worry, oh well, will other people notice if my child is being pulled out for an assessment or therapy? And I think the more we say that this is just part of the education, the overall education of the child, I think that would also help.
I really like what you said about destigmatization because there is kind of a stigma around seeking services, right? You start to think, oh, there's something wrong with my child if I have to seek services for them. And I like what you said of just, this is part of their overall education. This is just another service that we can provide to help educate the child. And I really like what you said about that. That's
So
definitely something I'm going to use in my narrative.
thank you. Yeah, I think we just started thinking about that because it's sort of like, can we sort of say it's like a music class, or make it a little bit more just part of the routine rather than yeah, your child has a problem.
Right. Yeah. Nobody wants to hear that their child has a problem, right?
No.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about strategies in terms of, what can educators do in a classroom environment to help children who may need speech services? Let's say parents are not yet willing to reach out in that direction. What can educators do just to help them in the meantime?
Right. So yeah, so we actually have a really like a quick and easy webinar we sometimes provide. So that's something that we're always willing to do, and it has little short strategy videos, which can sometimes be helpful for visual learners, and it can also help with both educators and families, because it can be done. These strategies can be done at home, and the strategy actually are can be done even if your child does not have a language or speech delay. They can be helpful for any child. So, things you can do to encourage speech and language development. Start with the environment. So starting with setting up the environment to maximize success and little opportunities for learning, labeling things, categorizing, having little cozy corners. I'm sure you guys already have a lot of that stuff happening. That's oftentimes more speaking to the home environment when we're saying organize the environment. It's really important to use like simple and clear language. So making sure that you're giving short and simple sentences to children who are having difficulty understanding. And you can even repeat key phrases. So like if there's something specific you want them to understand, like you're trying to get them to understand the word under, you might say, the ball is under the table. It's under the table. So you would kind of emphasize that key statement.
Yeah, those are all good strategies.
Okay.
Obviously speech and language is like receptive and expressive, right? So like the
Yes.
understanding part and then the speaking part. So do you guys differentiate that, or is that like all just together, like, in terms of strategies, because you talk about understanding
Right.
as well as
Yes, that's a really
making words, right?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So all of the strategies I'm talking about can help with both. And I can go into a little kind of mini explanation about the difference between receptive and expressive language. But yeah,
Yeah, I think that would be good for our
okay.
listeners. Sure,
Okay.
go ahead with that.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So there's speech. So first of all, we need to differentiate between speech and language, because everybody calls speech therapy, but it's actually speech language therapy. It's easy to drop the language part and just call ourselves speech therapists, but we're working on speech and language and social and literacy and other things as well. So language is the talking and the understanding, and speech is actually the way we make the sounds and articulate. And everybody kind of thinks of speech therapy just as that, but there's all this other language stuff, right? And then within language, there's receptive language and expressive language, like you said. And the receptive language is our listening ability, understanding, comprehension. And there's no talking or gesturing or anything in receptive language. And expressive language is how your child communicates a message through words, gestures, signs, or symbols. So any kind of outward expression. And you can use like speech generating devices, pictures, that kind of thing. So then when people say, oh, my child isn't talking, that's usually more related to language. But if somebody says, I can't understand what the child is saying, sometimes that can be language, but it's usually more related to speech. So pronunciation or articulation. And within articulation, there are milestones as well, because we talked about those language milestones, but within speech articulation, we expect B at a certain earlier age, and R we wouldn't expect till age 6. So again, we have to look at what we would expect at a certain age for that.
Wow, that's fascinating because, I like to think that I know this topic, but you just educated me because I didn't know there was a difference between speech and language. And now I understand the difference. And also because my son has been part of speech therapy. Okay, let's just call it that.
Yes.
And he struggles on both ends. He struggles with speech because he still has difficulty with pronunciation of certain letters. And, he mumbles. So he has difficulty with articulating his speech. But he also has difficulty with the comprehension, right? Like two-step directions, things like that. So even though I thought I knew a lot about this topic, I didn't know that there was that differentiation. So thank you for that. That's going to be very helpful for our educators to
Oh,
know.
good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I think it's very common to to not know the difference. And I think what you said is right, that also you can have all of the challenges, right? Or less of a problem in one and more of a problem in the other. So, yeah, thank you.
I know that's great. That's wonderful information. Okay, so is there anything else you want to tell us about what you do and how you can help early childhood educators to essentially help children?
Yeah, so we have the webinar that helps for both educators and parents. We have screening appointments, which parents sometimes like because they're not full assessments. So if the parents are hesitant, it's just a 15-minute. We can just lay eyes and see if we think an assessment is necessary. So that can also be really helpful for families. And then we have we have speech therapy within the classroom, which is so convenient for families because they don't have to travel around for their appointments. It's helpful for generalization of goals because the teachers are then able to carry over the goals within the classroom, which is so important. They're with them all the time. So that's where the progress is going to be made. And of course, our clinicians also touch base with the teachers and make sure, or with the families, and make sure that they're also up to speed on what's happening. And, and then also training the teachers little by little, however is needed, right? So it may be that there's a full training on how to use a picture exchange, or there might be, teaching a teacher how to prompt a word, or even just some of the simple strategies that we were talking about, or generalizing the goals within the classroom as well.
Right. I know that in the daycare environment, we do, like almost every classroom has the picture exchange system. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what that is for the listeners who might not be familiar with that?
Sure. So when we go into the classroom, sometimes we call something a picture exchange, and it's actually maybe a visual schedule or a picture cue. So we actually go into a full description of this in one of our other trainings. So we really support all types of visuals. So helpful. So a visual schedule, we love those. That can help set expectations. It can do a lot of things for the class and for the kids. And then, those rings, those are more like picture cards or picture cues or communication aids. The picture exchange is actually a full program where the child takes a picture, they hand it to the person they're communicating with to request something, and then they receive that thing. And they've expanded it now more into less exchange based and trying to make it more like socially based as well. But it does help children who are learning to use words or are not using words yet, so that it can also reduce frustration, and it can also enhance the chance of using words as well.
Now, on that note, that kind of triggered another thing that I'm aware of, which is sign language. I know we haven't talked about that, but how do you feel about sign language or babies or children, young children learning sign language if they're having difficulty communicating with words?
Yeah, so we support like a total communication approach, right? So learning whatever's working, whatever somebody's
Right.
drawn to, because some people are more drawn to one thing than another. Some people are more visual, some people are more gestural, or both. So yeah, absolutely. It can be really helpful to it's like enriching or getting things going early, but for babies as well. We absolutely support that.
Yeah, well, I know that a lot of parents do teach their children basic sign language, like the more and things like that, even just as babies, just to help them communicate before they actually have the words to communicate. So
Yeah.
that's interesting
Yeah.
that you incorporate all those different aspects, visual, gestures. Sometimes we forget about, like I said, the nonverbal communication, and we're so focused on the verbal,
Mm-hmm.
that there's still other ways to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about how people can reach out to you. You mentioned you have some trainings, some videos. Tell us how we can get access to all that. And we'll also put all that information in our comments section here so people can access
Okay.
your website. But just let us know how we can reach out to you and where they can get more information.
I love it. Okay, great. Well, the best way is email, just to our main email address. And you said you'll provide it, but it's info@hellospeechgta.com. And our website is hellospeechgta.com. And we also have Instagram, Facebook, all that fun
Okay.
stuff. So you can follow us. We would love that. We do little tips and stuff on our pages as well.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll have all of those links in the comments so you can follow Mary's team at Hello Speech. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. We love early childhood educators and so happy to be here. Thanks, Susie.
Okay, welcome back. I'm happy to talk more about speech and language. I'm really happy to have Mary talk to us today about the differences between speech and language. I really thought speech and language was the same thing, and she really educated me today on the differences between speech and language, and I'm really happy to understand those differences now. So I'm really grateful for that learning today. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about language in general. You know, we as educators, we're working with children when their brains are growing at a very rapid rate. So we have so much impact on what children learn and how they learn. And I think learning language is one of the first things that children experience when they come into a daycare classroom. I know that even pediatricians have recommended that if a child is having concerns with speech and language, they should be attending a daycare. That's often the prescription. The doctor will say, you should enroll in a daycare program, even if it's just part time, because they see the benefits that we as early educators provide in terms of speech and language development. And children often benefit so much by being in a daycare environment and learning speech and language. We often don't realize the impact that we have in teaching language to young children. You know, as early as infants, all the way up to preschool age, we are teaching so many different components of language. You know, when we're singing songs or reading stories or just general communication, there's so much communication that happens in a classroom. I've even had parents come to me who have been concerned about their children with speech and have enrolled in my daycares. And after a few months, they've told me, you know, their language has just exploded, their vocabulary has exploded, because we don't realize how much language is happening within a classroom. You know, with peers speaking, with the children talking, with the teachers talking. Often there's multiple teachers in a room. So there's lots of language that happens in a daycare environment that just doesn't happen at home. There's not as much language as there is in a classroom. So we really do impact children a lot in terms of language development. And especially if there's speech and language concerns, we can do a lot to help the child. One of the things I really learned today as well is that communication is much more than just verbal. There's a lot of nonverbal communication that happens with children. She mentioned gestures, potentially sign language, potentially different kinds of body language. And there's so much that's part of speech and language that isn't even the spoken word. And so that was something that was interesting about today's podcast. I really think it's important that Mary talked about what to look for to know if the child that you're working with may need some extra help in terms of speech and language, may need to see either a family doctor or pediatrician, or perhaps go directly to a speech and language pathologist for an assessment. So, what should you look for? And I really like the particular things that she mentioned in terms of children not communicating with certain gestures that you might expect, like pointing. And so that really helped me to see this as more than just counting the number of words, although that is important. I really also learned that we need to look beyond just the number of words, but how does the child communicate in totality with their behavior, with their frustration, with their gestures, their nonverbal communication is just as important as how many words they can say. And we need to take that all into consideration when we're considering whether or not a specific child may need additional help or supports in the area of speech and language. And as you know, you are so critical as early childhood educators under the age of 6 years old. Children are developing at such a fast rate that it's so important that when you do notice those red flags that might indicate the child potentially needs some additional assistance with speech and language, don't hesitate. Reach out to your supervisor, reach out to the parents, and talk about it. This shouldn't be a difficult topic. We should consider this as part of children's education, as Mary said. We should destigmatize the need for speech assistance and look at it as part of just the regular education of a child. And that's how we can help more children to succeed. Thanks for tuning in to the ECE Classroom with Susie Beghin. For more information, you can visit our website at www.susiebeghin.com. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast so you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. Thanks for listening.